What in God's name do you think you're doing? That's my car! I am Judge Adam Fletcher! I am ordering you to cease this action immediately!
Good morning, sir. I'm aware your vehicle is parked in a designated fire lane. My duty is to enforce the law.
I don't care about the fire lane! Do you?
The morning of June 12th broke over the city of Oak Haven with the kind of oppressive humidity that promised a sweltering afternoon. At 8:45 a.m., the air was already thick, distorting the sharp lines of the Solomon B. Rhodes Justice Center into a hazy mirage of concrete and glass. The courthouse, a brutalist monument to 1980s civic architecture, stood as the city's unblinking eye of law and order. In front of its grand, imposing entrance, a curb painted a belligerent, non-negotiable shade of fire engine red stretched for a full 50 yards. Bolted to the sidewalk at precise, legally mandated intervals were metal signs that left no room for interpretation. The white reflective letters against a stark red background were unequivocal. No parking, fire lane, tow-away zone. For Officer David Cole, badge number 714, this was the fourth week of his first solo patrol assignment. At 26 years old, fresh from the Oak Haven Police Academy and a 4-year stint in the Marine Corps before that, Cole saw the world in clearly defined lines. There were rules, and there was the breaking of rules. There was procedure, and there was deviation from procedure. The fire lane in front of the county courthouse was not a suggestion. It was a line drawn in the sand by the city's fire code, a declaration of emergency access that superseded convenience, status, or the price of one's vehicle. And the vehicle currently occupying that fire lane was, without question, expensive. It was a brand-new Mercedes-Benz S-Class, its obsidian black paint so deep and lustrous it seemed to drink the morning light. The chrome trim glittered, and the triple-pointed star on the hood served as a silent, arrogant proclamation of its owner's success. It was parked directly in front of the main courthouse steps, not pulled over to the side, but angled with a casual disregard for the painted lines, as if the curb itself had been created for its personal use. It was the kind of parking job that didn't just break a rule, it sneered at it. Cole had seen the car from a block away as he conducted his slow, methodical patrol of the downtown Civic District. His 2022 Ford Police Interceptor utility hummed quietly, its air conditioning fighting a losing battle against the climbing temperature. Other officers he knew might have driven past. They would have recognized the car, or at least the type of car, and made an assumption. They would have assumed it belonged to a high-powered attorney, a visiting dignitary, or, most likely, one of the judges who presided over the 14 courtrooms inside. They would have made the pragmatic calculation that the paperwork involved in ticketing or towing such a vehicle was not worth the inevitable phone call from a superior, the subtle pressure, the quiet suggestion to let it go. But David Cole was not other officers. His academy instructors had praised his meticulous attention to detail and his unwavering adherence to protocol. They had also, in private evaluations, noted a certain inflexibility and a lack of nuance in non-critical situations. One evaluator had written, "Officer Cole applies the law with the same force to a jaywalker as he would to a burglar. He will need to develop a sense of proportionality." To Cole, however, proportionality was a dangerous, slippery slope. The law was the law. It was the great equalizer, the one thing that was supposed to apply to the man in the Mercedes just as it applied to the man sleeping on the park bench across the street. To ignore the former was to invalidate the latter. He slowed his patrol car to a crawl, his eyes scanning the scene. The Mercedes was unoccupied. The tinted windows prevented him from seeing inside, but there was no one in the driver's or passenger's seat. He checked the windshield and rear window. No judicial placard. No government permit, no temporary disability pass. There was nothing to indicate that this vehicle had any more right to be there than a hot dog cart. It was simply a flagrant violation, hiding in plain sight, protected by an invisible shield of presumed importance. Cole pulled his vehicle into a designated police spot 50 feet behind the Mercedes. He killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the distant city sounds of traffic and construction. For a full minute, he sat and observed, following his training. He documented the time, 8:47 a.m. He noted the weather conditions. He described the vehicle in his log. Black Mercedes S580, late model, no visible damage. He ran the license plate through the system on his dashboard-mounted laptop. The result came back almost instantly. The vehicle was registered to one Adam C. Fletcher, with an address in the exclusive gated community of Sterling Heights on the other side of town. A quick cross-reference in the city database brought up Fletcher's occupation. Judge, Oak County Superior Court. Cole stared at the screen. So the assumption had been correct. It was a judge's car. A wave of something that felt like disappointment, but was closer to grim satisfaction, washed over him. This was it. This was the test. This was the moment where the abstract principles learned in the academy collided with the messy, unspoken rules of the real world. He could get back in his car, drive away, and no one would ever question it. It would be the path of least resistance, the choice any veteran cop would advise him to make. Or he could do the job he had sworn an oath to do. He unbuckled his seatbelt, the click echoing in the quiet cabin. He opened the door and stepped out into the humid air, the fabric of his new polyester uniform already starting to feel sticky against his skin. He adjusted his duty belt, the familiar weight of his sidearm and equipment a comforting presence. With a steady, deliberate pace, he walked toward the black Mercedes, his reflection growing larger and clearer in its polished door. He wasn't just approaching a car, he was approaching a choice. And for Officer David Cole, there was really only one choice to be made. The sign was clear, the law was clear, and his duty was about to become very public. To understand why Officer David Cole did what he did next, you have to understand where he came from. He wasn't a product of a policing dynasty. His father was a union electrician, his mother a middle school librarian. They were people who believed in the simple, sturdy virtues of the American middle class. Show up on time, do the work you're paid for, respect the rules, and never, ever think you're better than anyone else. They had raised David in a small, tidy house in the city's working-class West Side, a world away from the manicured lawns of Sterling Heights. From his father, he inherited a methodical, problem-solving mind and a quiet respect for skilled labor. From his mother, he inherited a love of order and a belief that systems, whether the Dewey Decimal System or the United States Code, existed to create fairness and predictability in a chaotic world. But it was the United States Marine Corps that had taken these raw materials and forged them into the man who now stood beside a judge's illegally parked car. Cole had enlisted at 18, not out of a lack of options, but out of a deep-seated need for structure and purpose that high school had failed to provide. He craved clarity, and the Marines offered it in spades. In boot camp at Paris Island, he discovered that the rules were absolute and applied to everyone, regardless of background. The drill instructor's wrath fell equally on the son of a banker and the son of a farmer. Success was not about who you were, but about what you did. How you maintained your rifle, how you made your rack, how you followed orders under pressure. He served 4 years as an infantry rifleman, including a grueling 7-month deployment to Afghanistan. It was there, in the dust and chaos of Helmand Province, that his abstract belief in procedure hardened into a life-or-death conviction. On patrol, a forgotten piece of gear, a shortcut on a pre-mission check, a moment of casual disregard for standard operating procedure, these weren't minor infractions. They were invitations to disaster. He saw firsthand how a single moment of indiscipline could get people killed. He learned that rules weren't just suggestions written by people in comfortable offices. They were a shield, forged from the mistakes and sacrifices of those who came before. More pointedly, he developed a profound and visceral contempt for what he called rank-and-file hypocrisy. He'd had a platoon commander, a young first lieutenant from a wealthy family, who preached discipline and adherence to the rules of engagement, but was known for taking reckless shortcuts on patrol to look more aggressive for his performance reviews. This officer viewed the rules as tools to manage those beneath him, not as principles that bound him as well. Cole and his fellow enlisted men saw it for what it was, a betrayal. It eroded trust, the single most critical element of a functioning unit. The lieutenant's career ended abruptly after he jeopardized his men by ordering them to clear a building without waiting for EOD support, a violation of protocol that, by sheer luck, didn't result in casualties. Cole never forgot the lesson. True authority came not from the rank on your collar, but from the integrity with which you upheld the standards you imposed on others. When he left the Corps with the rank of sergeant, he knew he wasn't cut out for a desk job. He still needed a mission, a uniform, and a clear set of rules. The Oak Haven Police Department seemed like a natural fit. He'd excelled at the academy, not because he was the fastest or the strongest, but because he was the most diligent. He memorized the penal code. He practiced his radio calls until they were seamless. He spent extra hours on the driving course and at the firing range. He saw the police uniform as a mantle of public trust, an extension of the oath he had taken in the Marines. During his field training, his training officer, a cynical 20-year veteran named Sergeant Miller, had tried to temper his rigid idealism. "Kid, you gotta learn to pick your battles," Miller had told him one afternoon after Cole had insisted on writing a lengthy citation for a city councilman's wife who had an expired registration sticker. "That car," Miller had gestured to the councilman's wife driving away in a huff, "is a headache. The paperwork, the phone call I'm going to get from the chief, who's going to get a call from the mayor. All for what? A $60 fine?" "It's a violation, Sergeant," Cole had replied, his tone respectful but firm. "The law doesn't make an exception for city officials." Miller had just sighed and shook his head. "There's the law, and then there's the way things work. You'll learn." But Cole hadn't learned, or rather he had refused to. He saw that kind of pragmatism as the first step toward corruption. It was the same hypocrisy he'd despised in his former lieutenant. It was a system that maintained two sets of rules, one for the powerful and connected, and another for everyone else. How could he, in good conscience, write a ticket to a single mother for the same expired registration if he let the councilman's wife slide? How could he enforce a fire lane against a delivery truck if he ignored a Mercedes? To him, the badge didn't grant him the authority to decide who the law applied to. It charged him with the duty of applying it to everyone equally. So, as he stood in the oppressive Oak Haven heat, the polished black door of the Mercedes reflecting his own impassive face, he wasn't thinking about the judge. He wasn't thinking about the inevitable confrontation or the potential career repercussions. He was thinking of Sergeant Miller's "the way things work." He was thinking of his platoon lieutenant who believed rules were for other people. He was thinking of the signs, bolted to the sidewalk, and the red paint on the curb. He was thinking about his mother's library, where every book had its place, and his father's wiring diagrams, where every connection had to be just right. This wasn't about a car, it was about the entire system. Letting this go wouldn't be an act of professional discretion, it would be a betrayal of every principle that had guided him to this exact spot. With his mind made up, he unclipped his radio from his shoulder. The time for observation was over. The time for action had begun. The Honorable Adam Charles Fletcher, at 38 years old, was the youngest judge to be appointed to the Oak Haven County Superior Court in over a century. To the public, he was the embodiment of modern justice, sharp, articulate, and impeccably dressed. His official portrait, which hung in the courthouse lobby, depicted a man with a firm jaw, steel blue eyes, and a confident, almost condescending smile. He looked less like a public servant and more like the CEO of a company that had just posted record profits. In many ways, that was exactly how he saw himself, the chief executive of Courtroom 12. Adam Fletcher had never known a life outside the comfortable bubble of privilege. His great-grandfather had founded one of the state's most powerful law firms. His father, a respected appellate court judge himself, had ensured Adam's path was paved with every possible advantage. He'd attended an elite private boarding school, followed by an Ivy League undergraduate degree and a law degree from the same prestigious institution. He had never had to compete for a job, never had to worry about a bill, never had to experience the humbling friction of a world that didn't bend to his will. Deference was the air he breathed. From a young age, he learned that there were the written rules, the ones for public consumption for the little people. And then there were the unwritten rules, the ones that truly governed how the world worked for people like him. The written rules were about speed limits and tax codes. The unwritten rules were about legacy admissions, quiet phone calls to the club president, and the understanding that certain doors were always open. This worldview wasn't born of malice, but of an utter and complete lack of perspective. He didn't see himself as being above the law. He simply saw the law as something that, in its practical application, had a built-in variance for people of his stature. His appointment to the bench, fast-tracked by his father's political connections, had only amplified this sense of innate superiority. He enjoyed the theater of the courtroom, the black robe that conferred instant authority, the elevated bench that placed him physically above everyone else, the deferential "Your Honor" that preceded every address. He was known for being a stickler for courtroom decorum, often berating attorneys for being a few minutes late or for the slightest procedural misstep. He demanded punctuality and respect for the institution he represented. Yet this rigid demand for order was entirely external. It did not apply to him. His colleagues, the older and more seasoned judges, viewed him with a mixture of amusement and quiet disdain. They saw his arrogance for what it was, the insecurity of a man who had been given a position he had not truly earned. They traded stories in their private chambers about his temper, his impatience with public defenders, and his tendency to treat seasoned litigators like law students. And they all knew about his car. The black Mercedes was his personal symbol of arrival. He had purchased it the week after his judicial appointment was confirmed. For him, parking it in the fire lane was not an oversight. It was a perquisite of his position, a silent announcement. The main public entrance was for the public. The gated employee lot, located inconveniently at the rear of the building, was for the rank and file. The space directly in front of the steps, the most convenient and visible spot in the entire complex, was, by his own unspoken decree, his. For the past 2 years, this arrangement had gone unchallenged. The courthouse security guards, employees of a private contractor, knew better than to question him. The veteran police officers who patrolled the downtown beat understood the unwritten rule. They saw the car and simply kept driving. It was a small, unspoken accommodation for a powerful man, a routine part of the way things work that Sergeant Miller had tried to explain to Officer Cole. On this particular Tuesday morning, Judge Fletcher was running late. He'd been up late the night before at a fundraiser for a state senator, a necessary but tedious part of maintaining the network that sustained his career. He had awoken with a mild headache and a foul temper. He had a packed docket, starting with a contentious motions hearing in a high-profile fraud case at 9 a.m. sharp. He sped through the Sterling Heights gates, his commute punctuated by aggressive lane changes and a complete disregard for speed limits. When he arrived at the courthouse at 8:42 a.m., he pulled into his usual spot without a second thought. He didn't notice the painted red curb any more than he noticed the color of the sky. It was simply part of the background scenery of his life. He grabbed his expensive leather briefcase from the passenger seat, locked the car with a chirp of the key fob, and strode toward the courthouse steps, his black judicial robes slung over one arm. He nodded curtly at a few lawyers loitering outside, accepting their respectful greetings as his due. He was already mentally rehearsing his opening remarks for the hearing, his mind entirely focused on the performance of power he was about to undertake. The idea that he had just committed a mundane traffic violation, the kind he regularly saw people fined for in his own courtroom, would have been utterly laughable to him. He was Judge Adam Fletcher. He didn't park in a fire lane. The fire lane was simply wherever he chose to park his car. He was operating under a set of rules that existed only in his own mind, blissfully unaware that a few yards away, a rookie police officer, operating under a very different and much more rigid set of rules, was about to make them collide. Officer Cole stood beside the driver's side door of the Mercedes, his tablet in hand. Modern policing was a world of digital documentation, and he was a diligent student of its craft. He began the process for a tow, each step methodical and precise, just as he'd been taught. First, the photographs. He took a wide shot showing the entire vehicle and its position relative to the courthouse entrance. He took another showing the front of the car, the clear "fire lane" text on the curb, and the official sign on the sidewalk. He moved to the rear, capturing the license plate and another angle of the violation. He then took close-ups of the VIN through the windshield and the lack of any visible permits. Each photo was automatically time-stamped and geotagged. It was an objective, irrefutable record. Next came the citation itself. On his department-issued tablet, he opened the electronic ticketing application. Vehicle make, Mercedes-Benz. Model, S-Class. Color, black. License plate, 2FAST4U, a vanity plate that struck Cole as perfectly, almost comically arrogant. He entered the registered owner's information, Fletcher, Adam C. He selected the violation from a drop-down menu. Code 22500.1, parking in a fire lane. The fine was automatically calculated, $450. It was one of the steepest non-moving violation penalties on the books, a reflection of the serious public safety risk the offense represented. With the ticket digitally filed, the final step was the one that would set the morning's events on an irreversible course. He unclipped his radio. He paused for a moment, listening to the routine chatter, a minor traffic stop on the other side of town, a request for a case number. He waited for a break in the traffic, then pressed the button. His voice was calm, professional, and devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of a man simply doing his job. Dispatch 714. A clear female voice responded instantly. Go ahead, 714. Dispatch, Cole said. I'm at the Solomon Roads Justice Center, main entrance. I have a black Mercedes sedan, license plate 2FAST4U, parked in the fire lane. I've issued a citation and I'm requesting a tow. There was a brief, almost imperceptible hesitation on the other end of the line. It was only a second, but in the world of clipped, efficient radio communication, it was an eternity. The dispatcher, a 10-year veteran named Maria Flores, knew exactly what a black Mercedes at the courthouse entrance meant. She knew this was not a routine call. But Cole's voice was steady, and the request was by the book. Her job was to dispatch, not to question a sworn officer's judgment on the scene. 1040, 714, she finally replied, her voice returning to its normal professional cadence. You're requesting a tow for a vehicle in the fire lane at the county courthouse? She was giving him an out, a chance to reconsider. The slight emphasis on courthouse was a subtle warning. Cole did not take the out. That's affirmative, dispatch. The vehicle is unoccupied and blocking emergency access. He used the precise language from the training manual. No ambiguity. No room for misinterpretation. Understood, 714, Maria said. She knew this would be the talk of the department for the rest of the day. City tow is on a 15-minute ETA. Stand by. 10-4, Cole acknowledged. He clipped the radio back onto his uniform. The call was made. The gears were now in motion. He leaned against his own patrol car, positioning himself to have a clear view of both the Mercedes and the courthouse entrance. He crossed his arms, his expression neutral. This, he knew, was the hardest part. The waiting. It was in these moments that second thoughts could creep in, that the what-ifs could start to multiply. What if the judge came out before the tow truck arrived? What if a superior officer showed up and ordered him to cancel the tow? He pushed the thoughts aside. He had followed procedure. He had documented the violation. He had made a lawful request based on a clear and present infraction. His actions were, in the parlance of the department, clean. Whatever happened next, he was standing on solid ground. Inside the courthouse, Judge Fletcher was in his chambers, a spacious wood-paneled office on the 4th floor. He was shrugging on his black robes over his tailored suit, his clerk, a nervous young woman named Sarah, reading him a list of last-minute filings for the 9 a.m. hearing. He was only half listening, his mind still agitated from his hurried morning. "Your Honor," Sarah said tentatively, "the opposing counsel in the fraud case filed a motion to exclude—" "I've seen it, Sarah. It's frivolous. Denied," Fletcher snapped, not even looking at her. "Is the courtroom ready?" "Yes, Your Honor, everyone is waiting." "Good," he said, smoothing the front of his robe. He glanced at the ornate clock on his wall. 8:55 a.m. He liked to make the lawyers wait a few minutes. It reminded them who was in charge. He took a sip of water from a glass on his desk, completely unaware of the drama unfolding 4 stories below. His world was one of climate-controlled, deferential silence. He had no idea that a rookie cop and a tow truck dispatcher had just lit a fuse that was rapidly burning its way toward his bubble of privilege. The call had been made, and the consequences were now rolling toward him at 30 miles per hour. The city-contracted tow truck was a behemoth, a well-used flatbed with Oak Haven Municipal Towing emblazoned on its doors in faded blue lettering. It rumbled down the street with the slow, ponderous authority of a machine designed for one purpose: to remove vehicles that were not where they were supposed to be. The driver, a man named Gus O'Malley, had been towing cars in Oak Haven for 20 years. He was a connoisseur of illegal parking, and he'd seen it all: cars double-parked, cars blocking hydrants, cars left in handicapped spots by people who could sprint up a flight of stairs. But a tow call for the front entrance of the courthouse was rare. A tow call for a brand new S-Class at the courthouse was unheard of. As Gus turned the corner onto Courthouse Square, he saw the scene: the gleaming black Mercedes parked at its jaunty angle and the solitary ramrod-straight figure of a police officer standing near his patrol car. Gus let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be," he muttered to himself, his cynical heart warming slightly. "Rookie's got some stones." He eased the massive truck to a stop behind Officer Cole's vehicle, the hiss of the air brakes cutting through the morning humidity. He activated the truck's amber warning lights, their silent, rhythmic flashing adding a new layer of officialdom to the scene. Gus, a burly man with a thick gray mustache and a perpetually unimpressed expression, swung down from the cab. He was wearing grease-stained overalls and a baseball cap that had seen better decades. "Mornin', officer," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "This the one?" He gestured with his thumb toward the Mercedes. "That's it," Cole replied, his tone even. "Violation 22,500.1. It's all documented." Gus nodded slowly, his experienced eyes taking in the car, the signs, the red curb. "Yep, that's a fire lane, all right. And that's one expensive piece of machinery to park in it." He walked around the Mercedes, his work boots scuffing on the pavement. He was professional, but he couldn't help but be a little impressed. He ran a hand over his chin. "You sure about this one, kid? This ain't gonna be a simple hook and go. This is the kind of tow that makes phones ring." It was the same sentiment Sergeant Miller and the dispatcher had expressed, just phrased more bluntly. Cole's response was the same. "The law is the law, Gus. Are you able to tow the vehicle without causing damage?" Gus chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Son, I can tow a space shuttle without scratching the paint. It's a flatbed job. We'll cradle it like a baby." He walked back to his truck and began the methodical process of preparing the flatbed. He flipped switches in the cab, and the bed of the truck began to tilt downwards with a loud hydraulic whine, its steel ramp extending until it touched the pavement with a solid clank. The sound was industrial and final. It was the sound of consequences. The commotion had now begun to attract attention. The usual morning traffic of the courthouse, lawyers in hurried conversations on their cell phones, clerks carrying stacks of files, anxious-looking defendants and their families, was being disrupted. People slowed their pace as they walked up the courthouse steps, their eyes drawn to the flashing lights, the massive tow truck, and the gleaming black car it was clearly preparing to devour. A low murmur started to spread through the small but growing crowd of onlookers. Is that Judge Fletcher's car?" one young paralegal whispered to her colleague. "I think so," the other replied, her eyes wide. "Who on earth would be dumb enough to tow Judge Fletcher's car?" An older, more seasoned defense attorney who overheard them smirked. "Maybe someone who's not dumb at all," he said quietly, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Maybe someone who just knows how to read a sign." Inside the building, the gossip was spreading even faster. A court clerk who had been on her smoke break saw the scene unfolding and rushed back inside, spreading the news like wildfire through the administrative offices. The rumor moved through the building's nervous system, passed in hushed tones over cubicle walls and in brief text messages between offices. Within minutes, windows on the second and third floors that overlooked the entrance had faces pressed against them. This was more than just a minor traffic incident. It was a spectacle, a rare and delicious disruption of the rigid, self-important hierarchy of the justice system. The untouchable was about to be touched. Officer Cole remained impassive, seemingly oblivious to the audience he had attracted. He stood at a safe distance, directing the minimal traffic that tried to navigate around the tow truck. He was a solitary island of calm in a growing sea of anticipation. He knew the judge would have to come out eventually. It was only a matter of time. Gus, meanwhile, was all business. He attached the heavy-duty winch cable to the Mercedes' front tow hook, which he had expertly located behind a small panel on the bumper. He double-checked the connections, then walked back to the controls on the side of his truck. He gave Cole a simple nod, a silent question. "Ready?" Cole nodded back. "Proceed." With a grinding groan, the winch began to turn, the thick steel cable tensing. The black Mercedes, a symbol of power and privilege, began to move, dragged slowly and ignominiously up the steel ramp of the tow truck. It was 9:02 a.m. In courtroom 12, the lawyers and defendants were growing restless. The clerk, Sarah, had just poked her head out to announce that the judge had been briefly delayed. The delay, however, was about to become anything but brief. The first indication Judge Adam Fletcher had that his morning was about to unravel came not from a phone call or a warning, but from a sound. It was a low, grinding noise, a mechanical groan that managed to penetrate the thick walls and insulated windows of his fourth-floor chambers. It was a sound that did not belong in his ordered world, an industrial intrusion into the hallowed quiet of the judiciary. He paused in the middle of a sentence, his brow furrowed in irritation. "What is that noise?" he demanded of his clerk, Sarah. Sarah, who knew exactly what the noise was, turned pale. The gossip had reached her moments before via a frantic text from a friend in the clerk's office downstairs. She had been trying to figure out how to break the news. "I'm not sure, Your Honor," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Perhaps it's the construction down the street." But then another sound followed, louder and more distinct, the unmistakable, rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a large truck backing up. Fletcher strode over to his large window, which offered a commanding view of the courthouse plaza and the city beyond. He pulled aside the heavy velvet curtain and looked down. His expression of mild irritation curdled instantly into one of stunned disbelief, which then rapidly boiled into pure, unadulterated rage. Down below, like a scene from some absurd surrealist play, was his Mercedes. His brand-new six-figure obsidian black Mercedes was halfway up the ramp of a grimy municipal tow truck. Flashing amber lights from the truck and a nearby police cruiser painted a chaotic strobing pattern across the plaza, and a small crowd, his employees, the lawyers who argued before him, was gathered on the steps, some of them openly pointing, others with their phones out. For a moment, he was paralyzed by the sheer audacity of it. It was an impossible image, a violation of the natural order of his universe. It simply did not compute. Then, the paralysis broke, and a tidal wave of fury crashed through him. He didn't say a word. He just turned, his face a mask of crimson fury, and stormed out of his chambers. His black robe billowed out behind him like a storm cloud. "Your Honor, wait!" Sarah called after him, but he was already gone, his expensive leather-soled shoes slapping angrily against the marble floors of the hallway. He ignored the concerned and curious looks from other courthouse staff as he stalked toward the judge's private elevator. He jabbed the button for the ground floor with unnecessary force. The short ride down felt like an eternity. With every passing floor, his anger mounted. He wasn't just angry, he was profoundly, personally insulted. This wasn't an inconvenience, it was a challenge to his very identity. When the elevator doors opened, he burst into the main lobby and shoved his way through the security checkpoint without breaking stride, ignoring the startled guard's call of, "Good morning, Judge!" He pushed open the heavy glass doors of the main entrance and emerged into the humid morning air, a figure of righteous indignation. "Stop!" he bellowed. His voice, trained to command a courtroom, boomed across the plaza. "What in God's name do you think you're doing? That's my car!" The scene, which had been buzzing with quiet murmurs, fell instantly silent. The tow truck driver, Gus, paused with his hand on the winch controls. The crowd of onlookers froze. Every eye turned to the judge, standing at the top of the steps in his full judicial robes, his face contorted in a mask of fury. Officer David Cole, who had been calmly observing the process, turned to face the judge. He showed no surprise, no fear, no reaction at all. He simply stood his ground, his posture unchanged. He let the judge's furious words hang in the air for a moment before he responded. "Good morning, sir," Cole said, his voice level and clear, easily carrying in the sudden silence. He began to walk slowly toward the steps, closing the distance between them. "Is this your vehicle?" The question, so calm and procedural, seemed to enrage Fletcher even more. "Of course it's my vehicle! I am Judge Adam Fletcher! Now get it off that truck this instant!" He descended the steps, his robe sweeping the ground, until he was standing just a few feet from the rookie officer. He was taller than Cole, and he used his height, his position, and the full force of his personality to try and intimidate him. "Did you not see who I am? Do you have any idea the mistake you have just made, officer?" He squinted, trying to read the nameplate on Cole's uniform. Cole did not flinch. He did not look away. He met the judge's furious gaze with a steady, impassive one of his own. "Officer Cole, sir. And yes, I'm aware of who you are. Your vehicle was parked in a designated fire lane." He gestured with a calm, deliberate motion of his hand, not toward the judge, but toward the bright red curb and the metal sign. The gesture was a masterpiece of professional defiance. He was refusing to engage with Fletcher's tirade about his identity and status. He was redirecting the entire confrontation back to the simple, objective, and undeniable facts of the situation. A painted red line and a sign. "I don't give a damn about the sign," Fletcher spat, his voice trembling with rage. "I park here every day. Every single day. You are interfering with a judicial officer in the performance of his duties." "Sir," Cole replied, his voice still maddeningly calm, "my duty is to enforce the city's vehicle code, and right now your vehicle is being towed for a violation of that code. If you wish to contest the citation, you can follow the instructions printed on the back." The judge was left speechless. He was being spoken to not as a figure of immense power, but as any other citizen who had parked their car illegally. The rookie wasn't just towing his car, he was stripping him of his authority, his status, his exceptionalism, right here in front of the entire courthouse. The badge was facing off against the robe, and the badge, backed by the simple, stubborn logic of a painted red line, was not backing down. For Judge Adam Fletcher, the world had momentarily tilted on its axis. He stood on the pavement, his chest heaving, his mind struggling to process the officer's unyielding procedural calm. He was used to arguments, to legal parries, to intellectual combat. He was not used to being stonewalled by an immovable object in a police uniform. He searched for a new line of attack, a way to reassert the dominance that had defined his entire existence. "I am ordering you to cease this action immediately, officer," Fletcher tried again, his voice dropping to what he hoped was a tone of cold, menacing authority. "That is a direct order from a superior court judge. You will be held in contempt." Officer Cole's expression didn't even flicker. A lesser officer might have been intimidated by the legal threat, however hollow. But Cole had spent months in the academy studying the precise limits of his authority and that of others. He knew a judge's authority ended at the courtroom door. Out here on the public sidewalk, Fletcher was just a citizen, and an irate one at that. "Sir, with all due respect, your judicial authority does not extend to the enforcement of municipal traffic codes on a public street," Cole stated, the words sounding like they were lifted directly from a textbook. "I am the sworn officer on the scene, and this tow is proceeding lawfully. Now I need you to step back onto the sidewalk, please. You are obstructing the operation." Obstructing. The word hit Fletcher like a physical blow. He, a judge, was being accused of obstruction by a rookie cop. The humiliation was so profound it was almost dizzying. He looked past Cole and saw the faces in the crowd. They weren't just watching anymore. They were witnessing his utter and complete powerlessness. He saw smirks on the faces of defense attorneys he had berated in court. He saw wide-eyed shock from the clerks and bailiffs who were supposed to tremble at his approach. His phone was buzzing in his pocket, but he ignored it. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making. The tow truck driver, Gus, who had been patiently waiting for the confrontation to resolve, took the officer's words as his cue to resume. He turned back to his controls. "All right, officer," he called out, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm clear to proceed." "You are clear, Gus," Cole confirmed, turning his back on the judge in a gesture of finality and taking a position to ensure the crowd stayed a safe distance away. The message was unmistakable. The debate was over. The judge had lost. With another hydraulic groan, the winch restarted. The Mercedes, Fletcher's six-figure symbol of status, resumed its slow, shameful ascent onto the flatbed. The sound of the winch was the only sound in the plaza, a grinding, mechanical funeral dirge for the judge's authority. Fletcher stood frozen on the sidewalk, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his face a mottled patchwork of red and white. He was a king in a robe, suddenly finding himself a peasant in his own kingdom. Once the car was fully on the flatbed, Gus began the process of securing it. He moved with a practiced, almost balletic efficiency, strapping down each wheel with thick, yellow nylon webbing. Each click of the ratchets tightening the straps felt like a turn of the screw to Judge Fletcher. A young lawyer, perhaps emboldened by the judge's public neutering, held up his phone and openly recorded the scene. Fletcher shot him a look of pure venom, but the lawyer didn't even flinch. The aura of intimidation was gone. "All right, she's all strapped in," Gus announced a few minutes later. He retracted the ramp, the clang of steel on steel echoing across the now silent plaza. He handed a clipboard with an impound slip to Officer Cole. Cole took the slip, reviewed it, and then walked over to the judge. He stood at a respectful distance and held it out. "Sir, this is the impound receipt," he said, his voice still infuriatingly professional. "It has the address of the municipal impound lot and the phone number you'll need to call to arrange for its release. You'll also need a valid driver's license and proof of ownership. The citation was issued electronically. It will be mailed to the address on your registration." Judge Fletcher stared at the piece of paper as if it were a dead animal. He made no move to take it. To accept it would be to accept defeat, to become a participant in his own humiliation. Cole held it for a moment longer, then, seeing the judge would not take it, he placed it carefully under the windshield wiper of his own patrol car. "I'll leave it for you here, sir," he said. He then turned, gave a nod to Gus, and walked back to his vehicle. Gus climbed back into the cab of his truck, started the engine with a roar, and with a final hiss of its air brakes, the tow truck pulled away from the curb, carrying the black Mercedes with it. As it drove past the courthouse, every head turned to watch it go. Judge Adam Fletcher was left standing alone on the sidewalk. His robe, which moments ago had been a symbol of power, now felt like a ridiculous costume. The crowd of onlookers began to disperse, their hushed whispers and poorly concealed laughter stinging him more than any shout could. He was the most powerful judicial officer in the building, and he had just been forced to watch his car get towed from his own front door while his employees watched and filmed it. He was late for court, he had no car, and his authority was in tatters. The rookie officer hadn't just towed his vehicle, he had towed his pride along with it. The story was already becoming a legend. Back in his patrol car, parked in the same spot, Officer Cole did not immediately drive away. The tow truck was gone, the judge had stormed back into the courthouse in a silent fury, and the crowd had dissipated. But his work was not done. The most crucial part, the part that would protect him from the inevitable political fallout, was the report. In modern law enforcement, the incident wasn't real until it was documented, and the quality of that documentation could mean the difference between a commendation and a suspension. He turned on his body-worn camera, which had been recording since the moment he first stepped out of his car to approach the Mercedes. He spoke clearly and calmly, narrating the conclusion of the event for the official record. Time is 9:17. The vehicle, a black Mercedes, has been successfully towed from the fire lane by Oak Haven Municipal Towing. The owner of the vehicle, who identified himself as Judge Adam Fletcher, was present on the scene. He was provided with information regarding the tow and the citation. The scene is now clear. He then turned the camera off. The footage was automatically uploaded to the department's secure cloud server, an uneditable, time-stamped piece of objective evidence. Next, he turned to his dashboard laptop and began to write the narrative supplement for the incident report. While many officers treated this as a tedious chore, writing brief, jargon-filled summaries, Cole approached it with the precision of a legal scholar. He wrote in clear, concise, and unemotional prose. He detailed every step he took, from his initial observation of the violation to the final departure of the tow truck. He included precise times for every key event. 8:47. First observed black Mercedes sedan parked in marked fire lane. 8:49. Ran license plate. Confirmed registered owner as Adam Fletcher. Confirmed no visible permits. 8:52. Initiated tow request via radio dispatch. 9:01. Oak Haven Municipal Towing arrived on scene. 9:05. Subject identifying as Judge Adam Fletcher exited the courthouse and confronted this officer. He transcribed the most critical parts of his conversation with the judge verbatim, his memory for detail honed by his military training. He noted Fletcher's claims of authority and his threats of contempt. He then detailed his own responses, citing his duty to enforce the vehicle code and ensuring his language reflected a professional and non-confrontational demeanor. He wrote, "Subject became verbally hostile and demanded the tow be stopped, citing his position as a judge. This officer informed him respectfully that the tow was lawful and that judicial authority did not apply. Subject was advised to step back for his safety." He concluded the report by noting that the body cam footage would corroborate his entire narrative. He read it over twice, checking for any spelling errors or ambiguous phrasing. He then digitally signed and submitted it. The entire process took him less than 15 minutes. The report was a masterpiece of bureaucratic defense, factual, thorough, and utterly unassailable. He was about to put the car in drive when his patrol car's internal messaging system pinged. It was a direct message from Sergeant Miller, his old field training officer, who was now a patrol supervisor for the downtown district. The message read, "Cole, my office, now." Cole took a deep breath. This was the first test. He messaged back a simple, "Roger that, en route." As he drove the few blocks to the precinct headquarters, he felt a sense of calm. He had done nothing wrong. His evidence was perfect. He had the signs, the photos, the video, and a flawlessly written report. Whatever political storm was brewing, he was standing in the eye of it, protected by the very procedures he so deeply believed in. By the time he walked into the precinct, the shockwaves were already spreading. The story had leaped from the courthouse to the police station. The dispatcher, Maria Flores, had told her supervisor. The supervisor had told the shift commander. Several of the officers who had been on the courthouse steps as witnesses had already returned to the station, regaling their colleagues in the locker room with the tale of the rookie who had towed Fletcher's Mercedes. The station was buzzing. Cole walked through the squad room, and conversations fell silent. Heads turned. He saw smiles, looks of disbelief, and a few worried glances from older officers who knew the judge's temper. He walked into Sergeant Miller's small, cluttered office and closed the door behind him. Miller was leaning back in his chair, staring at his computer screen. He looked up at Cole, his expression a mixture of exasperation and something that looked suspiciously like pride. "I told you to learn how things work, Cole," Miller said, his voice gruff. "I didn't tell you to set the whole damn system on fire." "I enforced a clear violation, Sergeant," Cole said, standing at parade rest in front of the desk. "You towed a Superior Court judge's car from the front of his own courthouse," Miller retorted. "I've already got a voicemail from the chief's assistant. The chief has a voicemail from the presiding judge. The presiding judge probably has a voicemail from God, asking what the hell is going on in Oak Haven." He sighed and ran a hand over his tired face. "I just read your report, and I watched the BWC footage." He paused, letting the tension hang in the air. Cole waited, his expression unreadable. "It's perfect," Miller finally said, shaking his head in disbelief. "The report is perfect. The video is perfect. You were professional. You were polite. And the judge acted like a spoiled brat." He leaned forward, pointing a finger at Cole. "You're either the smartest rookie I've ever seen or the luckiest. I can't decide which. You backed a guy like Fletcher into a corner, and you did it so by the book that there's nothing he can do about it without looking like a petty tyrant." "I was just doing my job, Sergeant," Cole said. "Yeah, well," Miller grumbled, "your job just made you a legend in the locker room and a massive headache for everyone above the rank of sergeant. Go write your follow-up paperwork. And Cole, watch your back. Guys like Fletcher don't forget something like this." While the upper echelons of the Oak Haven Police Department and the county judiciary were scrambling to manage the fallout from the incident, a very different reaction was taking shape on the ground floor. In the precinct locker room, a place that ran on coffee, cynicism, and gallows humor, Officer David Cole had become an overnight folk hero. The story of the tow spread with the speed and intensity of a precinct rumor, which is to say, it was known by nearly every sworn officer in the city within an hour. It wasn't just the fact that he had towed a judge's car, it was the way he had done it. It was the confrontation, captured in all its glory on body cam footage that was already being quietly shared among trusted officers long before it would ever see the light of an official review. They watched the video on their phones, huddled in corners of the station, the audio barely audible. They saw the towering, robed figure of the judge, his face contorted in rage, bellowing, "Do you know who I am?" And they saw the rookie, standing his ground, calm and implacable, responding not with fear or apology, but with the simple, devastating logic of the vehicle code. For these officers, this was more than just a funny story. It was a form of catharsis. Every single one of them had been in a similar, if less dramatic, situation. They had all pulled over someone who immediately tried to leverage their position or connections to get out of a ticket. The city councilman's nephew caught speeding. The wealthy businessman who was a major donor to the Police Benevolent Association. The lawyers who thought flashing their bar card should be a get-out-of-jail-free card. They had all felt that pressure to bend the rules, to show discretion, which was really just a euphemism for showing deference to the powerful. Most of the time, they made the pragmatic choice Sergeant Miller had described. They would issue a warning, swallow their pride, and drive away feeling like they had compromised a piece of their integrity. But Cole hadn't compromised. He had drawn a line and refused to cross it. He had faced down the very embodiment of privilege and held him to the same standard as any other citizen. He had taken the abstract principle of equal justice under law, a phrase carved into the stone of the very courthouse Fletcher worked in, and made it breathtakingly, gloriously real. "Kid's got ice in his veins," one veteran detective remarked to his partner after watching the clip. Fletcher looked like he was about to have an aneurysm, and Cole just stood there talking to him like he was explaining the menu at a diner. "My favorite part," laughed a young patrol officer, "is when he offers him the impound slip. The look on Fletcher's face, priceless, absolutely priceless." The story took on mythic proportions. Details were embellished, as they always are. In one telling, the judge had thrown his gavel at Cole. In another, Cole had calmly quoted the relevant sections of the Constitution back to the judge. But the core of the story remained true, and it was the truth of it that resonated so deeply. When Cole finally finished his paperwork and walked into the locker room to end his shift, the usual boisterous noise died down. He went to his locker, wanting nothing more than to change into his civilian clothes and go home. As he was unlacing his boots, a slow, rhythmic clapping started from the far end of the room. It was picked up by another officer, then another. Within seconds, the entire room of 20 cops, veterans, rookies, detectives, patrol officers, was giving him a standing ovation. Cole looked up, genuinely surprised. He was not a man comfortable with being the center of attention. A slight flush crept up his neck. He gave a short, embarrassed nod of acknowledgement. An older, grizzled canine officer with a reputation for being impossible to impress walked over and clapped him firmly on the shoulder. "Nice work, Cole," he said, his voice gruff but sincere. "You did good today. You reminded a lot of people what this job is supposed to be about." The respect he had earned was not loud or flashy. It was the quiet nod from a senior officer, the free cup of coffee someone left by his locker, the way other rookies now looked at him with a newfound admiration. He had, in a single act, established a reputation for integrity that some officers worked their entire careers to build. He had shown he couldn't be intimidated or bought. He was a straight arrow in a world that was often bent. Meanwhile, in his chambers, Judge Fletcher was experiencing the inverse. He had been forced to call his wife to come pick him up, a humiliating experience in itself. He had canceled his entire morning docket, his clerk citing a sudden judicial emergency. His phone had been ringing non-stop. Calls from the presiding judge, from fellow judges, some offering sympathy, others, he suspected, barely concealing their amusement, and from the courthouse administrator. The story was everywhere. He felt exposed, ridiculed. The invisible armor of his authority had been stripped away, and he found he was just a man who had to figure out how to get his car out of the impound lot like any other schmuck. The locker room's hero was the judge's villain, and the legend being born in one was destroying the reputation being carefully guarded in the other. The humiliation of the morning did not subside for Judge Fletcher. It festered. By noon, his anger had cooled from a hot, explosive rage into a cold, diamond-hard resolve for revenge. He was a man who understood power, and he was determined to use every ounce of it to crush the young officer who had dared to defy him. This was no longer about a parking ticket. It was about reestablishing the natural order. It was about making an example of Officer David Cole. His first call was to Oak Haven Police Chief Michael Miller, no relation to Sergeant Miller, a man with whom he had a cordial, if not close, professional relationship. They served on a few city committees together and saw each other at the same political fundraisers. Fletcher dialed the chief's private line, bypassing any secretaries or assistants. "Mike, it's Adam Fletcher," he said, his voice tight and controlled, dispensing with any pleasantries. "Adam," the chief replied, his tone cautious. He had already received a full and frantic briefing from his command staff. "I was just about to call you. I've been made aware of the incident this morning, and I want to assure you we are taking it very seriously. I am personally—" Fletcher cut him off. "Save it, Mike. I don't want assurances. I want action. I was publicly humiliated and obstructed from my judicial duties by one of your officers. It's an embarrassment not just to me, but to the entire city administration." "I understand your frustration, Adam," Chief Miller said, trying to sound conciliatory. "I've reviewed the preliminary report and I've seen—" "I don't care what you've seen," Fletcher snapped. "I'll tell you what happened. A rookie, a cowboy with a badge and a chip on his shoulder, decided to make a name for himself. He was insubordinate, disrespectful, and showed a complete lack of professional judgment. This isn't a training issue, Mike. This is a temperament issue. This officer is a liability, and he does not belong on your force." The implication was clear. He wasn't asking for an apology or a reprimand. He was demanding Cole be fired. There was a moment of silence on the chief's end. Miller was a politician in a police uniform. His job was to manage the department, navigate the city's complex political landscape, and keep the mayor and city council happy. A public feud with a superior court judge was a nightmare scenario. But firing an officer for making a legitimate stop, especially a rookie, would destroy morale and open the city up to a massive lawsuit from the police union. Adam, I can't just fire an officer without due process, the chief said carefully. There will be a full internal affairs investigation. The officer has been placed on administrative duty pending the outcome. I can promise you it will be thorough and swift. Don't talk to me about due process, Fletcher shot back, his voice dripping with condescension. I am due process. I want his badge and his gun, and I want them by the end of the day. Is that clear? Or do I need to have a conversation with the mayor about the leadership at the Oak Haven PD? The threat was not subtle. Fletcher was leveraging his political connections, reminding the chief that his own job could be on the line. I hear you, Adam, the chief said, his voice now strained. I will handle it. After hanging up, Fletcher felt a grim sense of satisfaction. He had put the fear of God into Miller. He then made his second call, this one to the presiding judge of the Oak Haven County Court, a venerable and politically savvy man named Judge Lawrence Shaw. Larry, it's Adam, he began, adopting a more collegial, aggrieved tone. I'm sure you've heard about the circus outside the courthouse this morning. I have, Adam, Judge Shaw replied, his voice heavy. And to be frank, I'm appalled. Fletcher felt a surge of validation. It's an outrage, Larry. The police department is out of control. If they can treat one of us this way, imagine how they're treating ordinary citizens. It undermines the very authority of this institution. He was framing his personal grievance as an attack on the judiciary itself. I agree this is a serious matter, Shaw said. I've already spoken with the chief. However, Adam, I've also heard from at least a dozen members of the courthouse staff who witnessed the event. The consensus seems to be that you were less than composed. The gentle rebuke caught Fletcher off guard. I was being provoked by an insubordinate officer. Perhaps, Shaw said, his tone becoming cooler, but yelling at a police officer in your robes in front of the entire bar association is not a good look. It projects weakness, not strength. You gave that rookie all the power by losing your temper. He paused. My advice to you is to let the police department handle this internally. Pursuing this aggressively will only make you look vindictive and keep this embarrassing story in the news cycle. Let it go. Be the bigger man. Fletcher was seething. He wasn't getting the unquestioning support he expected. Shaw was advising him to retreat, to accept the humiliation. That was unacceptable. Thank you for your counsel, Larry, Fletcher said, his voice cold. He hung up the phone. It was clear he would have to fight this battle himself. The old guard was too cautious, too concerned with appearances. He felt isolated, but it only hardened his resolve. If Chief Miller wouldn't fire Cole, Fletcher would create a situation so politically toxic that the chief would have no choice. He began to think like the prosecutor he once was, plotting his next move. He would file a formal citizen's complaint against Officer Cole, alleging harassment, abuse of authority, and official misconduct. He would leak his version of the story to a friendly reporter. He would make Cole's name synonymous with police overreach. He would not be made a fool of. He would turn the rookie officer's life into a living hell until he got what he wanted. Officer David Cole, out of a job and out of his city. The power play had just begun. 2 days later, Officer David Cole found himself sitting in a small, windowless room in the Internal Affairs Division. The room was painted a sterile beige and contained nothing but a metal table and 3 chairs. It was designed to be intimidating, to make officers feel isolated and exposed. Across the table sat 2 stern-faced lieutenants, a man and a woman, who had built their careers investigating other cops. A digital recorder sat in the center of the table. Cole was not intimidated. He sat perfectly upright in his chair, his hands resting calmly on the table. He had his union-appointed attorney sitting beside him, a quiet, sharp-eyed man named Bill Hart. Cole had been placed on desk duty, a frustrating but expected part of the process. Lieutenant Evans, the senior investigator, began, Officer Cole, we are here to investigate a formal complaint filed against you by Judge Adam Fletcher. The complaint alleges unprofessional conduct, harassment, and abuse of authority during an incident on June 12th. This is a serious allegation. Can you please state your name and badge number for the record? Officer David Cole, badge number 714, Cole said, his voice steady. In your own words, officer, please walk us through the events of that morning, Evans said, her tone neutral. Cole recounted the incident with the same dispassionate, factual precision he had used in his report. He did not embellish, he did not editorialize, and he did not offer opinions. He simply stated what happened. He described seeing the car, identifying the violation, running the plate, and calling for the tow. He described the judge's arrival, his words, and his demeanor. Judge Fletcher alleges you were dismissive and insubordinate, Lieutenant Martinez, the other investigator, interjected. He claims you smirked at him and took pleasure in escalating the situation. That is incorrect, Lieutenant, Cole replied calmly. My demeanor was professional and respectful throughout the encounter. At no point did I raise my voice or use unprofessional language. I simply informed the judge of the violation and the lawful procedure I was following. Did you know it was his car before you called the tow? Evans asked. I knew the vehicle was registered to him, yes, Cole said. And knowing he was a superior court judge, did you not feel it was appropriate to exercise professional discretion? Martinez pressed. This was the key question, the one that got to the heart of the matter. Before Cole could answer, his attorney, Bill Hart, spoke for the first time. Lieutenants, my client is not required to answer questions about his subjective feelings. He is required to answer questions about his actions. His actions were 100% in accordance with department policy and state law. The vehicle was in a fire lane. Policy dictates it be ticketed and towed. The status of the owner is, and should be, irrelevant. The lieutenants exchanged a look. They knew Hart was right. Let's move on, Evans said. We have Judge Fletcher's sworn statement. Now we'd like to review the other evidence. We're going to play your body cam footage from the incident. We'll stop it periodically if we have questions. Martinez dimmed the lights and turned on a large monitor on the wall. The footage began to play. The room was silent, filled only by the sounds from the video, the morning ambiance of the city, Cole's calm radio calls, and the hydraulic whine of the tow truck. Then, the judge appeared on screen, his face a mask of rage, his voice booming from the monitor's speakers. What in God's name do you think you're doing? That's my car! The investigators watched, transfixed. They saw the entire encounter from Cole's perspective. They saw the judge's wild gesticulations, his spittle-flecked tirade, his threats of contempt. And they saw Cole, a steady, unmoving presence in the center of the frame. He didn't smirk. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't betray a single flicker of emotion. He simply responded to the judge's fury with calm, procedural statements. The video was devastating. It didn't just support Cole's version of events, it annihilated the judge's. When the footage showed Fletcher refusing to take the impound slip, Martinez paused the video. His complaint states you threw the paperwork at him. Cole just looked at the frozen image on the screen, which clearly showed him holding the slip out respectfully. As you can see, Lieutenant, that is not what happened. They played the rest of the video in silence. When the lights came up, the entire atmosphere in the room had changed. The lieutenants were no longer looking at Cole as a subject of an investigation, but as a victim of a powerful man's temper tantrum. We also have your incident report, Evans said, holding up a printout. It's one of the most thorough and well-written reports I've seen from a probationary officer. She looked at her partner, then back at Cole. We have statements from half a dozen witnesses, attorneys, court clerks, even the tow truck driver. Every single one of them corroborates your version of events and contradicts the judge's. She leaned back in her chair. The formal, interrogative tone was gone. Officer Cole, off the record for a moment, she said. You knew who he was. You had to know this was going to blow up in your face. Why did you do it? Cole considered the question. He looked at his attorney, who gave a slight nod. Because, Lieutenant, Cole said, his voice resonating with simple conviction, the sign said no parking. My job is to enforce the law, not to make exceptions for people who think it doesn't apply to them. If the badge doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean anything. The two lieutenants looked at each other, There was nothing more to say. Cole's defense wasn't just his words or his lawyer's arguments. It was the digital, irrefutable evidence he had so meticulously gathered. His body cam had been his shield, his report, his armor. Judge Fletcher had tried to bring the full weight of his power down on a rookie cop, but he hadn't counted on that cop being a perfect soldier, armed with the most powerful weapon in modern policing, the truth, recorded in high definition. The Internal Affairs report landed on Police Chief Michael Miller's desk less than 24 hours after Cole's interview. It was concise, damning, and unequivocal. The conclusion was stated in bold type on the final page. Allegations of misconduct against Officer David Cole are determined to be unfounded. All actions taken were in compliance with department policy and municipal law. Recommend immediate closure of this investigation and full exoneration of Officer Cole. Attached to the report was a DVD containing the body cam footage. Chief Miller read the report, his shoulders slumping. He had hoped for some ambiguity, some minor procedural misstep by the officer that he could use as a peace offering to Judge Fletcher. A formal reprimand, a few days of retraining, something to show the judge that his complaint was being taken seriously. But there was nothing. Cole's actions were, as Sergeant Miller had put it, perfect. The report didn't give him an inch of wiggle room. Worse, the body cam video was political dynamite. If it were ever leaked to the press, Judge Fletcher would be crucified in the court of public opinion, and the city would look like it was persecuting a hero cop to placate a bully. His desk phone rang. It was the presiding judge, Lawrence Shaw. "Mike," Judge Shaw said, his voice grave, "Adam Fletcher is in my office. He knows the IA investigation is complete, and he's demanding a meeting with you. He's threatening to go to the press. I think you need to come over here to the courthouse. We need to resolve this now before it gets any uglier." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Miller said, sighing. The meeting took place in Judge Shaw's expansive, antique-filled chambers. It was neutral ground, but it still felt like the chief was on enemy turf. Judge Fletcher was already there, pacing in front of the window, his face a thunderous mask. Judge Shaw sat behind his large mahogany desk, looking like a weary referee at a prize fight. "Chief Miller," Fletcher began, whirling around as the chief entered. "I assume you're here to inform me that the officer who harassed me has been terminated." Chief Miller met his gaze directly. He was a politician, but he was also a cop who had come up through the ranks. He knew he had to back his people when they were right. "No, Judge, I am not. I'm here to inform you that the Internal Affairs investigation has fully exonerated Officer Cole." Fletcher's face, already flushed, turned a deeper shade of crimson. "Exonerated? That's preposterous. He targeted me. It was a malicious abuse of power." "With all due respect, Judge, that's not what the evidence shows," Miller said, his voice firm. He placed the DVD on Judge Shaw's desk. "This is the body camera footage from the incident. I've seen it. Judge Shaw has seen it. It shows Officer Cole behaving professionally and courteously while you did not." Fletcher was momentarily speechless. He hadn't known about the body cam. It was a relatively new technology for the Oak Haven PD, not yet on every officer. His mind raced, replaying the confrontation, trying to remember exactly what he had said and done. Judge Shaw interjected, his voice calm and authoritative. "Adam, I've seen the video. The chief is correct. Your behavior was inappropriate for a judicial officer. You were yelling. You made threats. The officer, by contrast, was a model of restraint. The video is, frankly, indefensible." "He provoked me," Fletcher insisted, his voice cracking slightly. "He asked if it was your vehicle and informed you of the violation," Chief Miller said flatly. "The only provocation was the fact that he was enforcing the law, the same law you've sworn an oath to uphold." The room fell silent. Fletcher was trapped. He had based his entire campaign of retribution on his version of events, a narrative of a rogue cop and an aggrieved judge. But that narrative had been shattered by an unblinking digital eye. He had no credibility left. "What do you want, Adam?" Judge Shaw asked, his tone softening slightly. "What is the end game here? The officer is not going to be fired. The city is not going to apologize because their employee did nothing wrong. If you push this, if you go to the press, all that will happen is that this video will be released. Is that what you want? Do you want every citizen in this county to see you screaming at a police officer because you parked your car illegally? The reality of his situation finally began to sink in for Fletcher. He was cornered. Any further action on his part would only lead to his own greater humiliation. He had played a game of high-stakes chicken, and the rookie cop hadn't even swerved. Fletcher had lost, completely and utterly. He stared at the chief, his eyes filled with a look of pure, impotent hatred. He said nothing. He simply turned, walked to the door of the chambers, and left, slamming it behind him. Judge Shaw looked at Chief Miller and let out a long, weary sigh. "Thank you for your professionalism, Chief. I believe this matter is now concluded." "I hope so," Miller said, though he doubted it. The official matter might be concluded, but he knew that the bitterness and resentment from this encounter would linger for a very long time. He had won the battle, but the war between power and procedure in Oakhaven was far from over. With Judge Fletcher's retreat, the official gears of the Oakhaven Police Department began to turn in the opposite direction. The threat had been neutralized, the internal investigation was closed, and Chief Miller, no longer squeezed between a furious judge and an ironclad IA report, saw an opportunity. The incident had been a massive political headache, but it could be spun into a public relations victory. It could be used to showcase the department's integrity and commitment to impartial policing. The first step was to formally clear Officer Cole's name. The day after the tense meeting in Judge Shaw's chambers, Cole was summoned not to IA, but to the chief's office on the top floor of the precinct headquarters. Sergeant Miller accompanied him, a silent show of support. When they walked in, Chief Miller was standing by the window, looking out over the city. He turned and smiled, a warm, political smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Officer Cole, Sergeant, please, have a seat." Cole and Sergeant Miller sat in the two leather chairs opposite the chief's large, tidy desk. "Officer Cole," the chief began, sitting down, "I've read the full report on the incident from June 12th. I've reviewed your statement, the witness statements, and the body camera footage. I wanted to tell you personally that this department is proud of the professionalism and restraint you demonstrated under considerable pressure. This was a complete reversal from the frantic, behind-the-scenes pressure of the past few days." Cole simply nodded. "Thank you, Chief." "Your actions," the chief continued, his voice taking on a more formal, speech-like quality, "were a textbook example of fair and impartial enforcement. You did not waver in your duty, regardless of the individual involved. That is the highest standard to which we hold our officers." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. "The IA case is closed, and you are immediately reinstated to full duty. Furthermore, I am awarding you a formal departmental commendation for exemplary conduct in the performance of duty." Sergeant Miller's eyebrows shot up. A commendation was almost unheard of for an officer still in his probationary period. It was a significant honor, one that would be a permanent and prominent part of Cole's service record. "A formal announcement will be made at the next departmental awards ceremony," the chief added. "But more importantly, I wanted to send a message, both within this department and outside of it. The message is this: in Oakhaven, no one is above the law. Our officers will enforce the code of this city without fear or favor. You, Officer Cole, have embodied that principle." It was a masterful piece of political maneuvering. By publicly rewarding Cole, the chief was inoculating the department against any future accusations from Judge Fletcher. He was turning the narrative from "rookie harasses judge" to "hero cop stands up for justice." He was also sending a powerful message to his own rank and file. If you do the right thing, and you document it perfectly, command will have your back. It was a massive morale booster. "Thank you, sir," Cole said again, his voice steady. He felt a quiet sense of vindication, but not triumph. He had never wanted a commendation or a public spectacle. He had just wanted to do his job. "That's all, gentlemen," the chief said, standing up to signal the end of the meeting. "Welcome back to patrol, officer." As they walked out of the office, Sergeant Miller clapped Cole on the back, this time with genuine warmth. "A commendation," he said, shaking his head. "You son of a gun. You didn't just win, you lapped him." The official exoneration and commendation had an immediate effect. The whispers of a rookie in trouble were replaced by the buzz of a rookie who had been proven right. Cole's status as a locker room legend was now cemented in official department record. When he returned to patrol the next day, the change was palpable. The subtle looks of concern from his colleagues were gone, replaced by nods of unambiguous respect. He was no longer the rookie who had picked a fight with a judge. He was the cop who had won. The clear message the chief intended to send was received, not just inside the department, but outside as well. A short, sanitized press release was issued by the OPD's Public Information Office, announcing the closure of the investigation and the commendation for Officer Cole. It didn't mention Judge Fletcher by name, simply referring to an incident involving a public official. But everyone in the city's legal and political circles knew exactly what it was about. It was a public, albeit polite, rebuke of the judge's actions and a full-throated defense of the officer. The power play had backfired spectacularly. Judge Fletcher had tried to end a rookie's career, and in the process had inadvertently made him one of the most respected young officers on the force. While Officer Cole's career received an unexpected and significant boost, Judge Fletcher's reputation suffered a slow, corrosive decline. There was no official sanction, no public censure from a judicial review board. His defeat was not codified in any official document. Instead, it lived on in the one place a reputation is truly forged and broken: the whispers, anecdotes, and shared memories of his professional community. The echo of his public embarrassment became a permanent fixture of his career. The first and most immediate change was in his own courtroom. Before the incident, his notoriously short temper and arrogant demeanor were viewed as an unfortunate but accepted part of his judicial personality, the quirks of a brilliant but demanding legal mind. Now, they were seen through a different lens. Every time he raised his voice at a defense attorney or impatiently cut off a witness, the unspoken thought in the room was, "This is the guy who threw a tantrum because his car got towed." His anger no longer seemed like righteous judicial authority. It seemed like the petulance of a man who couldn't handle being told no. Lawyers, a class of professionals who thrive on gossip and weakness, were the first to subtly shift their approach. The more experienced litigators began to push back, just slightly, against his rulings. They would ask for clarifications with a tone that bordered on condescending. They would make objections with a newfound confidence. They weren't overtly disrespectful, that would be professional suicide, but the reflexive fear and deference he had once commanded had evaporated. They had seen him stripped of his power on the courthouse steps, and the memory was indelible. He was no longer an untouchable figure in a black robe. He was just a guy who had to call his wife for a ride. The courthouse staff, from the bailiffs to the clerks, also treated him differently. The respectful greetings in the hallway were a little less enthusiastic. The speed with which his requests were fulfilled seemed to slow down by a fraction. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible, work-to-rule protest. They had witnessed his appalling behavior toward another public servant, Officer Cole, and their loyalty had shifted. Cole, the rookie cop, had shown more dignity and professionalism than the esteemed judge. The story became a cautionary tale, a piece of courthouse lore told and retold over lunch and after-work drinks. It was a story about hubris, about a man whose ego had written a check his authority couldn't cash. The vanity plate, "Too fast for you," became a running joke. Lawyers would mutter it under their breath when Fletcher issued a particularly harsh ruling. The details of his crimson-faced tirade became the stuff of legend. Fletcher felt the change keenly. He felt the smirks he could sense but not see. He heard the sudden silences when he entered a room. The atmosphere of deference he had breathed like oxygen was now thin and stale. He became more isolated, his interactions with colleagues growing more formal and strained. He had tried to make an example of Officer Cole, but the legal community had, in its own quiet way, made an example of him. The ultimate indignity came a few months later. He was presiding over a routine traffic court calendar, hearing appeals for parking tickets. A young, confident lawyer was arguing to have his client's ticket for parking in a loading zone dismissed. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, a barely concealed twinkle in his eye, "my client understands the importance of posted parking regulations. We all do. But sometimes, in the rush of a busy day, even the most law-abiding citizen can make a simple mistake. Surely the court can appreciate the context here and show a little leniency." The courtroom was packed. A ripple of snickers went through the audience of lawyers and defendants waiting for their cases to be called. The lawyer's words were ostensibly about his client, but everyone in the room knew who he was really talking about. The reference was unmistakable. Fletcher's face hardened. He was being mocked, openly, in his own courtroom. He gripped his gavel, his knuckles white. For a moment, it looked like he was going to explode. But then he looked at the sea of faces watching him, waiting for him to react, waiting for another tantrum. He realized he was trapped. If he got angry, he would be proving them right. With a visible effort, he reined in his temper. "The context," he said, his voice strained and quiet, "is a sign that clearly indicated a loading zone. The leniency is the fine, which could be higher. Fine upheld. Next case." He had done the right thing, the judicial thing. He had remained calm, but it was a hollow victory. He had lost control of his own narrative. The lingering echo of that morning on the sidewalk would follow him for the rest of his career, a constant, humiliating reminder of the day a rookie cop taught him that the law, in the right hands, could be more powerful than the judge who was supposed to embody it. The impact of the toe incident radiated far beyond the courthouse and the police precinct. It seeped into the very training culture of the Oak Haven Police Academy, where it became an enduring and powerful lesson, known colloquially among cadets and instructors alike as the Fletcher precedent. It was no longer just a story. It had become a core part of the curriculum. Sergeant Miller, Cole's former field training officer, was occasionally invited back to the academy to guest lecture on patrol procedures. He made the story the centerpiece of his presentation. He would put the body cam footage up on the main screen in the auditorium, a place usually reserved for videos of high-stakes shootouts or dramatic police chases. "All right, listen up," he'd begin, addressing the room full of eager, nervous cadets in their crisp, new uniforms. "You're all going to learn about use of force, criminal procedure, and the penal code. That's the easy part. The hard part is learning how to handle power, both yours and other people's." Today we're going to watch a video of what is, on paper, a routine tow of an illegally parked vehicle. But it's also the most important lesson in professional integrity you will ever learn. He would play the video without interruption. The cadets would watch in stunned silence. They saw the same things the officers in the locker room and the investigators in IA had seen. The judge's explosive rage and the rookie's impossible calm. When the video ended, Miller would turn up the lights. "Questions?" he'd ask. Inevitably, the first hand up would ask what he had asked Cole. Why didn't he just let it go? He knew it was a judge. "Because," Miller would reply, pacing in front of the screen, "his job wasn't to know it was a judge. His job was to know it was a fire lane. The moment you start making decisions based on the former instead of the latter, you've failed. You've compromised yourself and the badge you wear." The Fletcher precedent became a teaching tool for a dozen different lessons. It was used in ethics classes to discuss impartial enforcement. It was used in communications training as a masterclass in de-escalation, showing how maintaining a calm, professional tone can be more powerful than shouting back. Most importantly, it was used in documentation and report writing workshops. "Look at this report," an instructor would say, displaying Cole's narrative on the projector. "It is a work of art. It's factual, it's chronological, it's emotionless." This report, combined with that video, made Officer Cole bulletproof. The judge had all the power, all the connections, but Cole had the evidence. In the 21st century, a well-documented case beats a powerful man's anger every single time. Your camera and your keyboard are your best defense. Never forget that. The incident also had a tangible, lasting effect on the culture around the courthouse itself. The unwritten rule about the judge's personal parking spot was, of course, gone forever. But the change was deeper than that. The casual sense of entitlement that had once permeated the area, the assumption by powerful attorneys and officials that minor laws didn't apply to them, began to fade. Police patrols around the Civic Center became more diligent. Tickets were issued for expired meters and illegal parking, regardless of whether the car was a beat-up sedan or a luxury SUV with a bar association sticker on the bumper. The fire lane in front of the courthouse remained conspicuously, almost sacredly, clear. No one dared to even stop there for a moment to drop someone off. It was as if the red paint on the curb had been given a fresh coat of authority. Officer Cole, though he never sought the attention, became the living embodiment of this new standard. Other officers, when faced with a connected driver, would think of him. What would Cole do? The answer was always simple. He would do the right thing by the book. The Fletcher precedent gave them a shield. If they ever got pushback for ticketing someone important, they could simply say, "Sir, after the Fletcher incident, we have a zero-tolerance policy, no exceptions." It took the personal discretion, and therefore the personal pressure, out of the equation. The story served as a permanent lesson in humility for the powerful, and a lesson in courage for those tasked with holding them accountable. It fundamentally altered the delicate balance of power in the city's civic heart. All because one rookie officer, on one humid summer morning, refused to believe that a man's profession should allow him to park wherever he pleased. He hadn't just cleared a fire lane, he had cleared a path for a more equitable form of justice, one ticket at a time. Years passed. The city of Oakhaven continued its steady rhythm of crime and justice, progress and decay. The Fletcher precedent, once a fresh piece of precinct gossip, solidified into a respected chapter of local law enforcement history. The two men at the center of that history saw their careers, which had been so dramatically intertwined on a single morning, diverge onto starkly different paths, each permanently shaped by the weight of that one encounter. Officer David Cole's career flourished, built on the unshakable foundation of integrity he had displayed in his first month on the job. He was promoted to detective ahead of schedule, his meticulous nature and refusal to cut corners making him a natural investigator. He worked in the property crimes unit and then moved to the more prestigious homicide division. His case files were known for being models of clarity and thoroughness. Defense attorneys privately groaned when they learned Detective Cole was the lead investigator on their case because they knew there would be no procedural sloppiness, no easy angles of attack. He was fair, but he was relentless. The commendation he received for the toe incident was the first of many, but it always held a special significance for him. It was a reminder of the fundamental choice he had made, the choice to enforce the law as it was written, not as it was conveniently interpreted. He never spoke of the incident with Judge Fletcher unless asked, and even then, he would only give a brief, factual account. He took no pleasure in the judge's humiliation. For him, it had never been personal. It was, and always would be, about the unyielding line painted on the curb. Judge Adam Fletcher, on the other hand, never fully recovered. He remained on the bench, his position secured by a lifetime appointment. But the trajectory of his once meteoric career flatlined. Any aspirations he might have had for a higher appellate court or a federal appointment vanished. He was seen as damaged goods, a man with a temperament problem and a public relations liability. The incident had exposed a fundamental flaw in his character, and in the cautious, risk-averse world of judicial appointments, that was a fatal blow. He became a more cautious, more subdued figure in the courtroom. The explosive outbursts of temper were gone, replaced by a brittle, simmering resentment that often manifested as sarcasm and passive aggression. He was a man going through the motions, his passion for the law seemingly extinguished by his public shaming. He still wore the black robe and sat on the elevated bench, but the symbols of power felt hollow. He had learned the hard way that true authority isn't granted by a title or a uniform. It's earned through respect, and that was something he had irrevocably lost. He still drove a Mercedes, but he was now obsessively, almost comically careful about where he parked it, always choosing a spot in the furthest corner of the designated employee lot, far from any painted lines. The two men's paths rarely crossed, but on one occasion, some 7 years after the tow, Detective Cole was called to testify in Judge Fletcher's courtroom as the arresting officer in a murder trial. As Cole took the stand and was sworn in, the two men locked eyes across the courtroom. There was no visible sign of recognition from the judge, his face a neutral, professional mask. But for a fleeting moment, Cole saw something in his eyes, a flicker of the old anger mingled with the deep, permanent stain of humiliation. And Cole, in turn, felt not pride or satisfaction, but a quiet, solemn understanding of the weight of his own actions. That single, by-the-book decision years ago hadn't just been about a car. It had altered the course of 2 lives, humbling the powerful and validating the principled. It was a silent testament to the idea that a badge, when worn with integrity, could carry more weight than a gavel swung with arrogance. In the end, the story of the judge and the rookie is a study in character. It's a quiet analysis of what happens when an immovable object meets a supposedly unstoppable force. Judge Fletcher's downfall wasn't caused by Officer Cole. It was caused by a lifetime of unchecked privilege. His anger that morning wasn't about a parking spot. It was the bewildered rage of a man encountering for the first time a system that refused to bend to his will. His entire identity was built on a foundation of exceptionalism, the belief that the rules that governed the masses were mere suggestions for him. When a rookie officer failed to acknowledge that exceptionalism, the entire foundation of his ego cracked. He wasn't just losing a confrontation, he was experiencing a profound and terrifying identity crisis in public. What if Fletcher had reacted differently? What if, upon being confronted, he had simply said, "You're absolutely right, officer. I was in a hurry and wasn't thinking. I apologize." The entire event would have vanished. The officer would have likely voided the tow, perhaps still issued the ticket, and the judge would have driven away with his dignity intact, earning a measure of respect for his humility. But his arrogance made that path impossible. What if Officer Cole had backed down? He might have had an easier career in the short term, avoiding the wrath of a powerful man. But he would have carried the knowledge of his own compromise, a small but corrosive seed of doubt in the very principles he swore to uphold. He would have learned the lesson Sergeant Miller warned against, that justice was negotiable. By holding the line, he preserved not just the law, but his own soul. The core lesson is not that all judges are arrogant or all rookies are heroes. It is a deeper, more resonant truth about accountability. It reminds us that integrity is not about how we act when we are being watched, but about our adherence to principles when we think no one is, or when we believe our status grants us a pass. The black robe and the blue uniform are symbols of immense power, but they are also symbols of immense responsibility. The moment the wearer believes the power is for their own benefit and not for the public's, they have betrayed the trust that gives the symbol its meaning. What does true authority look like to you? Is it the power to command or the integrity to serve? Have you ever witnessed someone calmly stand up to a powerful person who was clearly in the wrong? Share your story in the comments below. Your support helps us continue to bring these important lessons to light.